Hi, this is Mark Plotkin, doing a piece for bestsaxophonewebsiteever.com, also the best URL ever. I have here today Bob Reynolds. He's taking the time to talk to me over in Los Angeles. He's one of the best saxophone players out there right now, and just to give you a little bit of background, you can do a quick Google about him and get a lot more, but essentially growing up went to a performing arts high school, later attended Berklee College of Music, began writing and received 4 ASCAP Young Composer Awards, and fast forward a few years later, and he's on the road with John Mayer most of the time. So to start off, I thought that, you know, obviously all those things are incredible accomplishments. The latter definitely is the one that's given you the most notoriety as of late. And I was specifically interested, actually, I saw you play just last week in New York at 55 Bar, and you know, it's really interesting to look around the room and see the kind of crowd you're drawing, because there's definitely people there who are used to going to 55 Bar, and then you have people who, you know, mainly know you from the pop world. And I was definitely curious what it's been like for you to gain fans that really don't normally listen to instrumental music or jazz music, really just know you through loving pop music and other styles, but are starting to accept this other music. What that's been like for you?
Yeah, that's true. That definitely, if you were to look around that audience, the demographic is probably different at my show than it is for some of the other shows that go down there. And, you know, I think it's, well, it's great, obviously, because I want to play to as many people as I can. I mean, that's the goal. But I think what's happened with, it certainly is not everybody out of like John's audience, but you know, there's like you know, rings or layers of fans that, you know, that are fans of his. You know, you've got obviously tons and tons of people that like, oh yeah, I like John Mayer music and blah blah blah, and you whittle it down, and then there's a small core of fans that are just like really not only fans of his, but they're just like really music lovers.
Mm-hmm.
And then so maybe, you know, being introduced to those people through that, you know, through working with John has been great, because they otherwise wouldn't have been exposed to like what I do, the type of thing that I do. And then so maybe they're at a concert and they hear me doing what I do in that context, and they go, wow, that was really moving, you know.
Yeah.
I got to check this guy out, you know?
Yeah.
And then hopefully, you know, whatever it is that I do takes over from there. But you know, the cool thing is, like, at first I thought maybe that those people would be the type of fans that they would show up like, oh, I wonder if John's here. I wonder if John's here. And that's not really the case at all. They're totally just they're really supportive of, you know, what I do. But I think it's like, it's not just because of that. Like, you might get the door open because of that. But if the music that you're delivering on the other end of it doesn't stand on its own legs, then they're not going to really stay in very long.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
So for me, that's the real benefit is, and what I'm seeing now is like, it's not just like, oh, I'm a jazz musician and I have this pop gig. Now let me try to get these people who like this pop music to come like my jazz music. It's more like, I make music. Sometimes I make it with John. Sometimes I make it on my own. Sometimes I make it with other people. And the reason I enjoy playing with John, the reason that John enjoys playing with me, is because I have a certain like sensibility to the way I play that works in that context. So I think when those fans find themselves at a show of mine, they're not going, gee, this is really, really different than what I thought. They're going, wow, this is really awesome. It's like that little bit that I knew I liked already.
That's the whole thing, yeah.
20, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Getting a little bit to your music, I was curious how composing usually begins with you, because you know, if anyone watching Googles you, actually, it's interesting. A lot of the videos come up. You have a lot of cool stuff with loop stations you're playing around with, which I found is actually a really fun way to write. I know you're into technology. On your lesson site, which we'll talk about, you know, you're at the piano. I was curious if you have a usual formula, if it varies all the time, just where composing comes from for you.
Different places. A lot of times I get my best ideas walking.
Interesting.
Literally just walking down the street. I don't know what it is. It's like something about walking, you know, I probably had, I don't know, can't think of them off the top of my head, but a bunch of songs where it's just like I'll hear and it could be a melody or it could be a bass line. It normally starts, I can't say that I really hear chords when I'm walking down the street, so I either hear a melody or I hear a bass line. One of the two.
Interesting.
A lot of the stuff like that, you know, years ago that I was writing, the stuff that's like on the Can't Wait for Perfect album, some of that is like very, it's like bass melody centric, meaning it's, you know, there's a lot of like written bass type of stuff, ostinatos or melodic bass parts, you know what I mean? And then melodies that kind of mesh with those, but maybe the inspiration started with the bass line. For instance, a song like of mine, Common Ground, first track on that CD. It's the first thing you hear.
Very melodic, yeah.
You know?
Boo-doo-doo. Yeah.
But it's melodic, right?
Yeah.
So I'm into that. I maybe like was really into that for a definite period of time. That song actually that was inspired by a song that D'Angelo wrote and did with the hip-hop artist Common on an album called Like Water for Chocolate.
Oh, yeah.
So the genesis Common Ground is, there's a song on Common's album, and it's called Ghetto Heaven. And they actually, I don't know why they did this, but they jettisoned the original track with D'Angelo and they re-recorded it with like Macy Gray and made a video, and they tried to make it more like, you know, mainstream.
Right.
And now I think you can't even find the original version that had D'Angelo. But when I heard that song for the first time, I straight up stole the first two chords. I mean, that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
I stole the chords from that song.
Wow.
And the rest, then, you know, I built upon. I obviously put it in a little bit different time signature.
Right.
But it came from you know, some music I was checking out heavily at that time.
Yeah.
I was listening a lot to Common.
Well, one of my favorite things to do actually is if I'm ever, you know, at a party or in my car and I'm DJing with my iPod, I like to put on a tune that completely like throws my friends to be like, what is this? And my one for the past few months has been your version of Creep, where I put it on and be like, whoa. Give everyone some background, you know, a couple months ago you released a version of Creep that it sounds like it's maybe a quartet version of you, just layered over and over again, and just trio. Okay. Anyway, well, I was gonna say you should. I read a little blog you wrote about some rules you set for yourself for that cover, and it was really cool. Maybe tell people about that a little bit.
Yeah, let's see if I can remember the rules. I'd have to go back and check, but yeah, well, rule number one was I was gonna pick a very like well-known rock song. I mean, that's a subjective term, so well-known to me and, you know, whatever, people who know Radiohead and stuff. I wasn't thinking about it at the time, but when I did that was also when that movie The Social Network was like just starting to preview, and I think
trailer.
they were using Creep in the trailers, but that was just happenstance. And literally, okay, here's how that happened. I happened to, you know, now that I'm out in LA and not New York, I once again have a car and I can enjoy I love to listen to CDs in my car because it takes me back to when I was in high school. I would listen to a whole CD, not tracks and mixes and iPods and all this stuff, but like start to finish.
Yeah.
So I put, I had like a Radiohead compilation or something, and it was just spinning in my car for a few days, and, you know, Creep just was in my head all the time. And so literally, what happened was one day I was going to do a lesson for, you know, my students on odd time stuff, and I just started messing around with Creep, but it naturally felt like it should be in 7 to me, as things often do. And so I said, all right, how can I, like, it's a really simple melody, to do just sort of a straightforward thing wasn't going to really do any justice to it. I mean, meaning like I wasn't going to hook up my computer stuff and start like making backing tracks for it and do this whole digital thing. But what I was doing was I was playing and I started to outline the changes. I mean, the song's only got 4 chords. And so, I was just doing that, and through doing it, I started to think, this kind of sounds interesting. I wonder what would happen if. And I said, so the rules were, I'm going to do 3 things. I mean, I'm going to record myself 3 times, but I'm not going to get super uptight about it and try to make like a real perfect thing. I'm going to sort of just like open up 3 tracks and, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Open up 3 tracks, just do what I'm doing right now, like as I'm sort of warming up, but turn the record button on and do each one independently of the other, I think was the idea. Meaning I laid down like the first track and it was me just sort of, in that rhythmic fashion, kind of vertically outlining the chord progression. But then I muted that track when I laid down the next one, and then I muted that track when I laid down the next one.
Yeah.
So the idea was I kind of knew how long it was going to be, but I wanted to just, I wasn't even trying to be like super accurate with it. I just knew generally, the idea was like, even if I'm playing the chords up and down, I'm singing the melody in my head.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's cool. It almost, continue.
And then I unmuted all 3 and I'm like, all right, let's see what happened. And, that was that.
Yeah, it gives it almost like a Baroque sound, the way it's all arpeggiating like in and out of each other,
Yeah, and then what I did was I just, the one thing I did, which didn't involve any additional adding to it, but I just, if you listen to that recording or the video of it or whatever, when the melody drops out and it's just sort of the 2 counterpoint horns, I do bring the melody back in, but it's really
quiet,
off at the distance. Yeah, it's just kind of haunting and stuff. And then it eventually goes down to 2 saxophones, and then it ends with just 1.
Yeah, it's great. Cool. My next question was, you've really stood out by also taking on, some music education a little bit more seriously, in a way that I've found most jazz musicians, but all musicians are particularly scared of, which is using the internet. So why don't you tell people a little bit about your video lesson site?
Okay, so it started a couple of years ago when I moved to LA. The genesis of it was people were still asking me about taking lessons with me in New York, but I didn't live in New York anymore. And I was somewhere in LA and I was talking to somebody and sort of mentioning what was going on. They're like, oh, you should just do it through Skype or whatever. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. So that's how it started. I would say to these guys, well, I'm not in New York, but we could try this. And so it started with a couple, and that grew into a handful. And so I had guys sort of spread around the globe that I was doing these Skype lessons with. But and it was effective. But it was weird. It wasn't the same as like having a private student that, in the flesh right there, and every Wednesday you guys get together. And, it wasn't that relationship. It was more like coaching. Like we'd check in every 2 weeks or something, because I wasn't giving lessons to people that it was like, here's how you play the saxophone day 1.
Right.
So I have to credit one of my students who's a gentleman who's a little bit older than I am, and is actually a professional golfer and from the other side of the world. And he was like, you really should start making videos of this stuff, because then you don't have to be there. I could see this stuff when we're not having lessons, so on and so forth. It got me thinking. And the realization I came to was that if I had 8 different guys and I was gonna have 8 Skype lessons in a week, let's just say, I mean, I was gonna be telling more or less the same information to each one of them. It might be somewhat tailored to them, but their questions were pretty much going to be similar questions, and my answers weren't going to vary extravagantly. And it just started making more and more sense that even though there's definitely a lot of work on the front end putting it all together, it's really great because it's a way that I can sort of batch out my thoughts on stuff and share it with guys, and then they can kind of also discuss with me, but discuss with each other. It does, whatever part of the world they're in, it's on their timetable as well. And And in terms of why, it's like I love teaching. I mean, I guess I love like I love getting other people inspired. Is really what it comes down to, you know. And I would think it's sort of a similar thread. Like if you're at one of my shows, I mean, what would make me the most happy is like when the show is over, you feel like totally inspired. Whether you're a musician and it means like you want to go practice, or whether you're one of these like fans we were talking about at the beginning of the interview who's man, like I've never heard music like this before. I'm so happy right now. Like that fills me with joy.
Yeah.
I get the same feeling when somebody I shared information with as a like a student mentor student relationship goes, oh my gosh, like light bulb moment. I never thought about doing something this way. I just watched this video that you made. It like opened my eyes. Now I'm gonna go like practice all week, stuff I never thought of. Like that's exciting for me.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite things. I mean, full disclosure, I'm a student. One of my favorite things is sort of the non-judgmental review of a certain concept. Growing up, it's like if you're in a classroom, music or any subject, there's sort of like, well, I didn't totally get this. Am I going to raise my hand and ask her to repeat it, or are people going to look at me funny? And I felt that pressure, all the way through music school. And even though there's obviously there's nothing like being in person to really learn something and connect with somebody, but also just the ability to like, all right, I'm in my practice space where I'm comfortable. I'm going to watch this until I understand how to do it. And, there's a lot of, embarrassingly basic things that I feel, like I finally understood because I was able to watch it enough times,
Yeah, that's exactly. Because, that's not, there's nothing like weird about that. Like, I remember I took a lesson like when I was in college. I remember going to New York and taking a lesson with Chris Potter. Maybe I took a couple with him, but I had to like basically I had to do so much to convince him to just even give me the lesson in the first place. Like I was such an Uber fan. And the thing is, when I finally got to it, I was so nervous. I was nervous the bus ride from Boston to New York. I was just terrified. I couldn't even believe I made it all the way to his doorstep. I was blind with just anxiety. And then like we're playing and like he's like just takes his horn out like let's just play duo, and I'm like, what do you mean no Aebersold, no piano? Like everything dripped out of I didn't know what I was doing. And it was, do I remember that lesson or do I just remember the terrifying experience? I remember the terrifying experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. For exactly what you're saying, even though I had listed down some questions, like it wasn't a good way to absorb that information.
Right.
Whatever information was there. And certainly your analogy about like raising your hand in class, I think that's true. And one of the cool things about also a video that you don't get even in a personal one-on-one lesson is the repetition. Pause it, rewind it, watch it again, or come back to it a week later or a month later and go, oh, it's like a movie where you see it again and you get something out of it. And that was another thing that this student I was talking about who kind of planted the idea in my mind. He was like, he had recorded one of our lessons that we did on Skype, and he was like, man, I watched that like 20 times over the last week, and stuff really started to sink in, and it was so much more than just our real-time lesson.
Yeah. Just a few more questions. Also, along the video lesson line, in terms of your teaching style, something that particularly intrigued me is you've had a few videos where it's almost like I'm in psychology class or something like that, and it's really cool. It's that not every video is you with your horn in your hand, and there's one specifically, Think It, Say It, Play It, where you just talked about this philosophy of really learning changes and not expecting that you can play something if you can't put it together in your head first, which I love. Were those passed down to you by someone, or is that just from you checking out things other than music?
It's a long story. I won't bore you with how there's a lot of ways that came together through some different stuff that I've been involved with in my life. Nothing weird or anything. I just like they weren't anything I learned from musicians. So I'm just trying to say it wasn't anything I ever learned in music school or in music books or anything like that. But I love to learn about stuff, and it was something that I had come across in like sports psychology books, which for a time I was reading, because just when I kind of had the realization years ago about like the mental game. You know, you watch sports on TV, you don't really think about it, but like watching Mariano Rivera like come in and close for the Yankees, it's like, yeah, like he's throwing a pitch and his arms got to move the right way. But he throws the same pitch every time. Like what's really happening here is his mind is at work. That's what's winning these games. It's his, you know what I mean? Like the mental power that these guys have. And I started kind of digging in golf and tennis and, you know, in baseball and whatever. So it wasn't something I intentionally tried to say, oh, I'm gonna see how I can use this with music. It was the result, as many things tend to be in life. It was the result of like, I had that information, and then I was in a situation where I got frustrated, and I like somewhere I dug in and like tried to use an analogy with a student, and it was like in this one instance. I pulled all this stuff and I said, wait a minute, let's try this. And we did it. And it was like night and day. Like, it was the most remarkable thing I'd ever seen. And then I was like, wow, this is powerful right here. And it, you know, I said on that blog thing or on that video, like I was teaching somewhere and I had lessons with about 8 or 10 different students in like a 2-day period. It was like a back-to-back crazy lesson-a-thon. And, you know, it was during that time period where with the last several students where I kind of stumbled on this. It's not that I'm the first person to talk. It's not that I invented anything, but maybe the way that I was putting it together and using it, it just had a really strong effect. And it was just, you know, in summary, it's like what I realized is it's back to the Chris Potter thing. Like the kid who's coming in, so the guy's coming in having a lesson with me. He's nervous already, but he's also not, you know, that far along in his development. And you know, so yes, he knows the blues because he plays it in his combo at college, and maybe he's taken a solo in big band. But his knowledge is so surface level. Right. It doesn't have any roots. It can't stand on its own. He's not confident, you know, and he's reacting, meaning like he's stumbling over himself as he tries to play. Right. He doesn't. He's like 2 measures behind himself, and I realized like. What's happening is he can't see ahead. He really can't see. It's like you're driving and you're blind. You know what I mean? And so when we started going through these visualization exercises, and we said, all right, I'm going to take 15 minutes, and we did this. I'm telling you, man, it was like we flipped the switch, and all of a sudden it was a whole different player in front of me.
It makes perfect sense. I mean, maybe I can link to some information on it for people watching. But the basic concept is that how do you ever expect to play something complicated or simple if you can't visualize what you're playing, and then if you can't just say it, or you know, forget, you know, using your fingers and relying on the instrument to get it out. You have to be able to wrap your head around it first, and a lot of people gloss over it.
And that what was happening. We were just using like the basic blues form as a structure to work off of. And I'm saying to this guy, can you even talk me through the blues? Well, no, he couldn't. Well, if you can't talk me through it, how do you expect me to play through it on this like piece of metal in your hands? You know what I mean? And if you do, you're just, what is it? Just lucky muscle memory from, it's, like I said, it's surface level. You're never, if you're only getting that deep with things, you're never going to have the confidence to use space and use rest. And what do nervous players sound like? They play all the time. Right. It was just like a jumble of notes rolling into the net. I just keep playing and keep playing. It's just kind of noise. Yeah. You know, there's no forethought or structure to what's coming out of your instrument.
Cool. Thank you so much for sitting down with us, and hopefully we'll be hearing a lot more from you in the future.
I hope so. Great.